Anyway, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar about driving diversity and inclusion and encouraging more women onto board positions. Really looking forward to delving into this important topic and to exploring how we can collectively create more inclusive leadership opportunities for women. We understand that boards that reflect diverse perspectives not only drive better decision making, but can also contribute to more equitable and impactful outcomes in our organisations and communities. The main objective of this webinar conversation really is to inspire and help equip women with the skills and confidence. I think confidence is really important to pursue board positions or leadership positions in various or across various sectors. So not only in our own sector, but across the private and the public sector. We hope to highlight the importance of gender diversity on boards and provide some practical steps for women to prepare for and secure these roles. We're delighted to have three fantastic guest speakers with us today. We have Jessie Duncan, lead on equal representation from Engender, who will share insights on advancing gender equality in leadership. And also Starkeeper Morton, Chief Exec from The Haven in Stonehaven, a fantastic social enterprise doing great work in the local community. Starkeeper will offer a unique perspective on grassroots leadership and community-driven change and a personal insight to her journey to board membership, and also Susan Mackey, who is currently the chair on SCAF, a leading social enterprise based in Aberdeen, who will also share a unique insight and experience and discuss strategies to support women as they step into board role and leadership positions. And we're looking forward to engaging in inspiring discussion, and we encourage you to share your thoughts and have an open conversation and any questions throughout the session. The session is being recorded, so hopefully you're happy to have your camera on. If not, please do just switch it off. Thank you for being part of this important conversation, and I think we'll just get started if that's okay. And Jessie, if you would like to start us off, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. It's fantastic to be here. I do have some slides to share, so just bear with me. I don't use Zoom as often as I used to, so just give me a wee minute to make sure that I can share my slides and that you can all see them, and then I will get on with it. Can everyone see that? And is it filling the screen? I get a wee nod if that's, you can see my slides, yeah. Okay, fantastic. Just 2 seconds. Oh, I'm terrible. I'm absolutely terrible with Zoom. Really need to, we've switched to using Teams more often, and you can tell. Anyway, yeah, so great to be here. Thank you so much to Janice, Social Enterprise Scotland, for hosting the discussion today on this really important topic of how we get more women into board positions across all sectors, public, private, third, and beyond. I'm Jessie Duncan. I lead on equal representation, women's equal representation in politics and public life at Engender. I'll tell you a wee bit about Engender and our work, in case you haven't heard of us before, don't know much about what we do. We are Scotland's feminist policy and advocacy organisation, and we work to drive positive change in key areas that affect women's lives in Scotland. We work to influence legislation, policy and culture change across various areas, including women's health, social security, prevention of violence against women and girls, unpaid care, and crucially for today, women's representation in public life. And I get the privilege to focus most of my time on that topic, which is really rich and wide. I spend a lot of time thinking and working with stakeholders to ensure that collectively we're taking action to ensure that women's voices are being heard everywhere that decisions are being taken. Most of my work does end up focusing mostly around the kind of political side of public life, thinking about local councils, government, political parties, parliament, etc. But when we think about public life, it's hard to underestimate the importance that women's involvement in industry, in charities, and board membership is playing a huge role in that across all of these different and varied sectors. And yeah, you can't underestimate the impact that that has in terms of increasing gender equality across our society. I just thought we would have a wee look maybe at some of the numbers to start us off. So when we look at the numbers across different key decision-making spaces in Scotland, it's clear to see that diversity is still far from where it needs to be. In politics, just 35% of local councillors in Scotland and 45% of MSPs are women. In the private sector, women are still are 42% of FTSE 350 board members, but just 1 in 10 top CEOs. So that's a huge power imbalance, and I think kind of reflects the importance of ensuring that there's really good diversity on boards when you think about that lack of representation in those top executive roles. Charity trustees, a report in 2022 found that 64% of charity trustees in the UK are men. And on public boards, 36% of those are still not gender balanced, despite legislation actually existing that calls for 50-50 balance. I'll talk a wee bit more about that later, maybe if anyone's interested. And then I found some interesting information saying that social enterprise sector is leading the way in terms of women's board representation at 55%. So that's fantastic, and be really, really interesting to hear about best practice. I don't know if that's right. If it's not right, please correct me. But I was heartened to read that. But I think there's still a clear challenge across all of these sectors when it comes to diversity as well beyond gender. Representation of Black and minority ethnic people, disabled people and younger people in terms of leadership is nowhere really where it needs to be. It took until 2021 to see the first women of colour elected to the Scottish Parliament, for instance. And when we look at charity boards, at the 2022 report that I found demonstrated that just 8% of trustees are people of colour, and that the average age of a trustee is 61. So it's not really reflecting the rich diversity of the communities that we have and that these organisations are there to serve. So still a long way to go. And why is it important? Fundamentally, I think the issue of diverse leadership, the issue of women's representation in decision-making spaces is an issue of fairness and of justice. It's a democratic principle that women and men deserve an equal say in all aspects that impact their lives. However, kind of beyond it just being the right thing to do, there is a huge body of evidence that shows the really tangible benefits to having more diversity in leadership positions to organisations and in wider society. And there was a large-scale study that was done by the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London, which analysed political leadership, but there's a lot of parallels between that and leadership in other sectors when we think about board membership, when we think about business. It demonstrated that there are huge positive outcomes just in terms of the quality of decisions that are being made. The research demonstrated, I can link to this for anyone that's interested as well, demonstrated that on average, women in politics, women policymakers work harder to represent their constituents. This links to a stronger sense of trust in government and democracy. Women's increased representation is associated with countries that have less corruption and higher quality public services. States with high levels of women leadership are even less likely to go to war. There was evidence that women bring collaborative and inclusive leadership styles to traditionally divisive environments. And women policymakers focus on issues that benefit the most vulnerable in society, possibly because of greater levels of experience of using various different public services or experiences of different forms of inequality or deprivation. So that kind of diversity is lending itself to a more rounded, a more informed decision-making process. And yeah, I said that a lot of these parallels can be found beyond politics as well, when we think about all decision-making spaces. So in business, there's been a lot of research that points towards companies with more diverse boards being more profitable, companies with more diverse decision makers demonstrating more more ingenuity, less complacency, more gender diverse boards, correlating with less excessive risk taking in the boardroom. Financial fundraisers and funders are also, financial regulators, sorry, and funders are also starting to look more at diversity of board membership in reporting and assessment. So that's something to be, for all kind of organisations to be thinking about and bearing in mind when making decisions around board membership and strategy. And also it's becoming very important to customers, staff and service users. They are looking at board diversity. They're wanting to see themselves represented within those who are making the decisions and taking decisions about services and that they rely on. So really a whole host of benefits to this. I do want to say a wee bit about why kind of this inequality, when we looked at the numbers there, and when we think about this issue, why does the inequality persist? So accessing decision-making spaces in all spheres of public life still kind of too often relies on access to networks or kind of who you know, sometimes known as the old boys club. But basically this serves to perpetuate the status quo. And when we think about decision-making spaces, whether it's boards, whether it's politics, being historically really male-dominated, that can, it can just kind of create this cyclical effect where who you know can become really important in terms of accessing these spaces. Something else that kind of comes up is, and this is, I suppose, just true across the board, that a lack of role descriptions and expectation setting can sometimes be missing. Again, this kind of perpetuates the status quo when you think about the need to diversify boards, attract new people, perhaps from groups that have been historically underrepresented on boards, into these spaces. There's a need to make it really, really clear, I think, about what's actually involved in these spaces so that these networks become less important. And so people can clearly have a clear understanding about what it is they're getting themselves in for before making that decision to stand, whether it be for a board position or public office or go for a job, making sure that that information is really transparent and accessible. And a lack of that can kind of perpetuate that barrier. Unconscious bias and kind of structural bias in recruitment as well. So it's the same across all industries. Unconscious bias kind of translates into like negative assumptions about an individual who's going for a role because of gender or other aspects of their identity, and without kind of commitment to transparent recruitment processes, that is kind of often reported as an issue. And when we think about one of the things that I think is really, really important to flag as well as a kind of persistent barrier is the issue of guarding against burnout. And I'd be really interested to hear from speakers who will be following a little bit about managing potential burnout with board positions and voluntary positions of all kinds. I think when women and other people from groups who've been marginalised in these spaces kind of enter a boardroom or enter like a political space, for instance, for the first time, they're often going to come up against these structures that have kept them out for such a long time. So kind of finding themselves in a position of having to blaze the trail and be the first to, bring up the issue of potentially hybrid working practices or more flexible approaches to working that are going to benefit them and potentially bring in a lot more diverse people and open doors perhaps to people who haven't been able to get into these spaces in the past. And that creates a whole, as well as the role itself, can create this whole other layer of work that someone might have to consider. And burnout, I think, and just sort of exhaustion can be a risk and does often get reported. And I don't want to be too negative. Apologies if that does like a real big list of all of the negatives. I think like it'll be so great to hear from the speakers around strategies to kind of manage some of these things or experiences with dealing with some of these. But I've been kind of heartened in the preparation for this presentation actually to see that there is a lot of work, and it's recognised that these issues, these barriers are recognised, and the need for greater diversity in board membership is being recognised as a priority, and that there's hopefully going to be more support to make it a reality. So I mean, this webinar is a great step in that direction. I think having these conversations, and you know, is a real step in the right direction in terms of reducing barriers and building a path towards ensuring greater diversity in terms of board membership. The Scottish Government's Social Enterprise Action Plan that was launched just last week, I think, or the week before, has included in it an objective around increasing board diversity to better reflect the population as a whole as a key objective and a key priority. So it'll be really interesting to see how they intend to support that and what that's going to mean. And also I mentioned before that there is legislation when we think about public boards. So public boards include colleges, universities, transport partnerships, health boards and others. Legislation does exist to drive diversity and to push for a 50-50% representation of women and men on public boards. And that legislation is slowly starting to hopefully have an effect in terms of public boards. So maybe other kinds of boards as well can look to that as an example of good practice and see where it can be replicated. I just wanted to, others again will have a lot more to say about this, but a couple of organisations that I just wanted to flag in terms of the work that they do to support women onto boards or to support other underrepresented groups onto boards, changing the chemistry. They are a Scotland-based organisation with a mission to diversify the boardroom across third, private and public sectors and provide all kinds of practical support around confidence building and board CV development and things. And Women on Boards UK as well kind of operate at a similar kind of model, looking at a UK level as well. So support is available, it is out there. And yeah, just to kind of finish off on a bit of a positive note, like more action is urgently needed to enable more women and more underrepresented groups to access decision-making spaces across our politics and our public life. And I did want to flag, like I said, I want to flag those some of the barriers that we know exist, because it's really important to go into any new role with as much information as possible about recruitment processes, barriers, challenges might be encountered, and role expectations. But it's really important, I think, to remember why you're doing it, why it's important. It's all about the outcomes, the really positive outcomes that I talked about just a moment ago, that diverse representation offers to organisations in terms of the quality of outcomes organisationally, but also what it offers to communities and to our society in terms of creating organisations, whether it's public, private, third sector, that understand the needs of the people that they serve. And you know, this has the ultimate impact of hopefully reducing inequality and being more responsive to communities' needs. And if you're interested in any more about our work at Engender, so that seems to be a bit of a blank slide. I had to put a slide in just kind of outlining the work that we do on and around this issue, but I will share more about that, since I don't think that you'll be able to. I don't know why that slide's gone blank, but I will share more info about anything that we do in this area in case you're interested. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Jessie. That was really, really interesting. A really, really interesting sort of stop tour, I guess, on some of the key issues and topics that need discussed and perhaps delved into a bit more. So thank you so much for that. The research is really, really interesting. And I think we can all sort of appreciate and acknowledge sort of the inequality versus equality and that need for diversity across anything we do in life, but certainly across sort of board structures, across all sectors. Yeah, the impact of having that diversity, I think we can all sort of appreciate, but it's how do we affect that change and how difficult a job that can be at some points in life or some points of your career even, because it cuts across your professional and your private life, I feel. But yeah, thank you for that, and welcome some questions. If we could perhaps move on to Starkeeper, are you happy now to have your presentation? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm already so grateful to be asked because I wasn't aware of ingender or what was it called? Changing the chemistry. So I'm going to make sure that I get involved with them at some point. So sorry, just want to make sure everyone can see my presentation. Is that looking okay? Yeah, great. My board member, who's our secretary on our board, Rachel Frame, she actually put together this presentation for me. So already that shows you the value of having like amazing creative women on your board. But thank you so much, Social Enterprise Scotland, for putting this on. It's exactly what I needed about 7 years ago. So the fact that it's sort of starting to happen is really exciting for me. And I remember when I did the CEO training during the pandemic with Social Enterprise Academy, they really encouraged and said the best thing you can do for your career is to get on a board. And I'd never even occurred to me to sit on another board until then. So the fact that I'm even here is highly amusing to me. I wish we could all time travel and see me 7 years ago, where I was in a really different place. So let's time travel. I'll take you with me anyway. So how I ended up on a board is because I needed to create one. I was going for funding and we were set up as a company limited with an asset lock and I couldn't get any funding because they said you need a board. And I was like, why do I need a board? And they said, well, to make sure you're just going to use the money for what you say you're going to use the money for. And that was like a whole concept for me. I'd never sat on a board. I didn't know anything about boards other than on movies. And I was redirected to our TSI, our third sector interface locally, because I was told they could help me. And they started parading into the Haven, which I'll just quickly say is a well-being space, yoga studio, meditation. So you get the vibe. A parade of stale, pale white males who were all retired from the oil and gas industry. So you can imagine what it's like when they met me and then when I met them. And I was still so desperate. I was like, clearly they know more than me. Everyone's more experienced than me. This is how boards are done. I want to be taken seriously and I want to do things right. And I remember speaking to one of them, and he said he would do me the honor of sitting on the Haven board if I gave him a 10% cut of any future funding. And at that stage, I wasn't even getting a wage from the organization I set up. So the fact that this man seemed to think that he would get a cut, I don't even think that's legal. I still don't even know how that happened. And how I ended up actually creating my first board was by going to teach my yoga class and telling my yoga students about my struggles and challenges and barriers, and them feeling so sorry for me that they agreed to be on my board. And it just turned out it was all women and they were all amazing and experienced in their expertise of field and career. And they had never been on a board before, but together we did it. And I think we did it really, really well. So I just want to talk to you about some of the barriers to the boardroom. I really like this photo. I used it at the Social Enterprise Summit, Scotland Summit, where we did a day session on diversity and inclusion because it's like, if you look at that picture, which I'm pretty sure is America right now, and you put me in the middle of it, can you see how it just changes the whole scenario? So once I had a bit more board experience from the Haven and I really enjoyed it, I was like, I wonder what it's like to sit on other boards, because at the Haven we do things quite differently, a bit like what Jessie was talking about. Like they tend to be more inclusive, they tend to be more sort of community minded, and everyone's a bit more has an equal say, and everyone's opinions respected. And so I joined the first port board because they were the organization that had helped me and I felt safe with them. And that was really interesting for me because it was a big board, it was a national board, made me feel like I had to put on my big girl pants a bit. And my learning from that was really, really interesting, is that I have something of value, especially being a social entrepreneur, having been a beneficiary of that organization. And I know I've affected change specifically in funding panels. There are things that would not have been funded had I not sat on that panel and fought that corner. And then that made me realize actually it's really important to have a seat at the table in these spaces. And not being from Scotland, I'm not well networked. I don't have like any connections. So I would definitely say for me, it was finding safe spaces and safe people that I could explore that. And then also locally, I then wanted to find a board, which I'm now secretary on, and I now chair our local community hub, our sports hub, because I wanted to see have a small chair role to kind of explore that through as well. So, in 7 years, I went from having no board experience to now sitting on 4 boards. So, I mean, it's something I'm really passionate about. And also from my own experience, I was like, I wish I'd had an opportunity when I was younger to sit on a board. So we always make sure we have a youth board representative at the Haven. This is Blythe, and she was instrumental during our crowdfunder during the pandemic. We asked for £22,000 and we got £33,000 in 2 weeks. And part of it was because Blythe knew the technology and she knew how to live stream a lot of things that we were doing as part of our crowdfunder strategy. And so hoping in the future that now she's had the experience of sitting on a board, that's something that she will continue to do. So I would really encourage, and Jessie mentioned that about getting more youth engagement, and as chair of the Community Sports Hub, we have 4 youth sports hub leaders, so they get used to what it's like to be on a board and how to like affect change. So lessons that I've learned on boards. I love this picture. This is Annabelle. She, as of last Thursday, is our newest board member. She came through our pregnancy yoga and our new mum well-being group. She's an HR employment lawyer, and I'm going to be in contact, Jessie, with Engender, because one of our things is to have more feminist governance and policies. And so we actually strategically approached Annabelle because she's an HR employment lawyer, and she's never sat on a board before, and I think she has a lot to offer. So when we approach new board members, and Jessie had mentioned about perhaps there being burnout, and it's sort of like fatigue around this space. That's something personally I haven't experienced. And I think that's because we run a well-being organization. And I always say to anyone involved in our organization, if we're sacrificing our well-being to run a well-being organization, we're not doing it very well. We really want to walk the walk and talk the talk. And my experience on other boards where they have recruited based on CV or skills, they've done a skills audit and see what they needed, is they've forgotten the values part. So we only do any recruitment based on values. So we will ask, what's the Haven value, which is compassion, authenticity, community, and being courageous? Which one resonates the most to you and why? So yes, being strategic in who you approach, because your vibe attracts your tribe. We very rarely do open recruitment. Just because if someone's had experience on the board, then they'll tend to already know from their experience who would also be mutually beneficial. That's not to say that we haven't done open recruitment, and it's gone well, but our tendency is to be a bit more strategic and also have a good plan, a long-term plan and strategy for that. And yeah, be proactive. So if it's sitting on a board is something you're interested in doing, a little bit like me, where, when First Port was asking for board members and they were specifically asking for social entrepreneurs. And I think that was important and reflects what Jessie was saying about job description. And because they were asking for a social entrepreneur, and I was like, I know that I am a social entrepreneur, I felt I had something that I could offer of service that would be of value. All right, I think this is my last slide, so hopefully I'm doing okay. So call to action. You have to get a seat at the table for all the stats that Jessie gave you earlier. It's so important. And show up like you belong. And I think being North American, this helps a little bit because I just assume that I have an equal right to the table. Um, Confidence has never been something I really struggled with. I just think I'm very open with what I can do and what I can't do. And so I make sure when I do get a seat at the table that then I pull it up for other people. So like Blythe, our youth representative, and Annabelle, So if you need support in getting a seat at the table, I think organizations like Jessie mentioned, where they have peer mentoring, or you need some support, just a confidence in yourself to be able to do that, and be brave, because what you have to offer is valuable. I promise you, I've sat on boards, I've seen the stale, pale white males, and every single woman that I encounter in my daily life could do equal, if not better, than what I am seeing around the table. And that's not to say that there's not men who are allies and, really expert. And the chair of our board, Thane Laurie, which I know a lot of people know, is a champion for women. But what I have seen at a mom, at our new mom wellbeing group, demonstrates skills that could absolutely wipe a board table of a lot of the men around the table. And so don't let that be off-putting. And don't be apologetic about it. Like, you show up like you belong, and you do. And then my biggest advice is where I tend to go in more like a bulldozer or a bull in a china shop, is just to slow down and listen. So when you get a seat at the table, just really observe who's got the power, who's saying what, who's listened to, read the room. And that sometimes take time, like, take you a year of just 4 board meetings to really understand the landscape. So thank you so much. I hope I'm okay. I hope I haven't gone too far over, because I'm mindful of time. And I write a lot about my board journey on LinkedIn. So if you want to find the Haven and Stonehaven. So this slide back here, why your voice matters, and belongs on a board, that's an open week note I write weekly from LinkedIn. So you could find that retrospectively if you wanted some more information. And feel free to email me as well if there's anything that you want to ask offline. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, that's an open offer as well. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Starkeeper. That was really, really interesting. And from my perspective, I don't think anything you have said has been actually a surprise, if you like, because I know you and I know your journey, and that's been great. But it's really key, I guess, to actually acknowledge and realize that values are so important in everything that we do, and that is kind of crucial to becoming part of a board and going on that journey, because it does take time to settle into that position. Also, young people as well. I think that's diversity, with sort of all age groups across the board is really, really helpful. Just to have just that different perspectives involved in that decision making process. And I really like your vibes attract your tribe. So that's a really good tagline, shall I say? So thank you for that. I'm mindful of time as well. So Susan, do you mind if we move on to yourself for your present? Sorry, you're not having presentation, but you're just going to have a chat discussion with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Janice, and thanks for inviting me along. Feel quite privileged, and I've got two very hard acts to follow, so I've probably got a slightly different take, although there are some similarities to Starkeeper, which I find quite amusing because Starkeeper and I have known of each other's existence, but we've never actually met before today. So for those that don't know me, I'm Susan Mackey. I'm founder of CareApp Solutions, which is a company that specialises in digital innovation services and GDPR business support. So I act as a data protection officer for organisations. I also chair the board of SCARF, which is a charitable organisation with a 40-year legacy. So you can imagine how many white male pale board members that we've had over the years. Although we have had some women. Janice is sat on the board there as well. They're instrumental in, issuing advice on energy poverty in Scotland, which is a really, really vital service. And we've now got over 80 staff, and we deliver programmes on behalf of Scottish Government, local authorities, NHS and private organisations. So no pressure. So joining the board itself probably wouldn't have been an option for me without some real board preparation training. And I had never intended going down that path. I just find it funny that Starkeeper said the same thing. I'd never intended going down that path. I founded my own company in 2016, and having a few stop-start moments with perhaps taking other directors on, I had seen a women in technology programme that was being delivered by a company called WES, Women's Enterprise Scotland. And they were offering 20 women the opportunity to learn board governance, and it was specifically women in technology. I didn't meet the criteria because I was only in a small business, but because I'd had experience in large organizations delivering IT projects and things like that, I managed to blag my way onto this course. So they'd kind of come back and said, no, you don't meet the criteria. And I'd went back and said, listen, I really need this. I want my business to grow quickly, and I need to understand what a non-exec director would do on a board so that I can know how to do it well. So they gave my place. So I was the number 21 in the WES 100. And it really changed the course of my career, I can honestly say. Now, I'd always, to an extent, ignored, the whole man-woman thing. I'd never entered into the conversations, never discussed it, always opted to kind of, I'm going to be treated as equal, so I'm not going to look at what anybody else does. And I'd never jumped in that kind of so-called bandwagon. Never wanted to be labelled a troublemaker because I'm a people pleaser. Because after all, I'm a woman, and that was my huge wake-up call. So the Women's Enterprise Scotland taught me about me. What they did was they taught me how to understand my own bias, my own limitations, my own barriers that I had created for myself just by growing up as a woman. And it was really game changing. I'd always been aware of bias between men and women in jobs because from an early age, my dad owned a building company. So I even worked for my dad the summer holidays from the age of 11, but instead of sitting in the office, I used to go out and do the building work. I used to carry the bags of cement and, learn how to use the cement mixer. But I really quickly realised that there was only two roles you could play as a woman in the building industry because this was the 90s. You either had to be the Rottweiler or you had to be the Barbie. And that was the only two roles that existed in the building trade. So, and I was neither and didn't want to play any of those parts. So rather than join the family business, though I always helped them in the background, I embarked on my own career. So I went off and did my own thing, refused to work for the family business. I was the only family member that did that. and went off and did my own thing. I still had to play Barbie every now and again when my dad would go on holiday, and I used to have to come in and play the part to get the tradesmen to do the work that I needed to. And, you know, I played that part when I needed to, but I absolutely hated it and it didn't feel right for me. But through my career, you know, year after year, I would do lots of different things. And never really felt like I had any barriers. But time and time again, you know, especially when you go into the world of technology, I had no idea that I'd picked another career that actually had a huge amount of bias against women, which was technology. So I went into software development, implementing software systems, which women very much had a place in it, but it wasn't in the same way. People never ever saw me as a software developer. They always saw me as the admin or the, you know, so the kind of the roles that you would actually play. So the Women's Enterprise Scotland training was groundbreaking. And what I wanted to do was just share a little bit about the barriers that we looked at and we understood. Because if I can share some of these barriers and how you can overcome them, I think that's what's going to kind of help us move these kind of things forward. So if you don't mind, I was just going to take you through a couple of things around the barriers, and then I was going to do a little bit about choosing the right board for if somebody wants to go into board development. So some of the barriers for women. Women apply for posts that, you know, when you apply for a post as a woman, you can normally do around 90% of what's in that job spec, in comparison to most men will apply for that job at 50%. So the next time you're looking for a job and then you think, you know, I can't do, there's half of that I can't do. You know, just bear in mind that, you know, men will have a different perspective on it because it's inherently they've not grown up with the biases that we've given ourselves that we can't do this. So the next time you're looking for a job, if you can do 50% of that, apply for that job. You know, don't hold yourself back in that way. What's the next one? Women often the barriers to support, and it's something that I've seen a lot over the years. I still see it now, and it's always a big challenge, is actually how women are pitted against each other or think that other women are their competition. Now that's a huge barrier, and I would say that every person that's ever put a barrier up for me in work has never been a man, it's been another woman. You know, I can genuinely say, so how do we change that narrative? And I think we can only change that by helping other women. We have to be that key person that can step out and help another woman shine, you know, and I think it comes back tenfold. So it's actually not seeing, you know, I see the media plays a huge part of this when, you know, when women are slated in the media, they're bossy, they're, you know, how they're dressed is, you know, kind of you know, impacted, you know, that if you look at how a woman is slated in the media in comparison to how a man's slated in the media, it's completely different. So the next time you're reading your magazine and it's slating a woman, think about if you put a man into that position, would they have ever said that about a man? So it has been in that training that I was giving kind of put that gender lens. I do things like I read a contract or a job description, and I'll sometimes do a little search and see how many he's there is in it in comparison to she's. And you'd be really surprised. Look at a company's website, you know, if they're advertising positions or, you know, how they about us. It's always like you see a lot of he's in there. My first contract I was given as a board member, I put back because it had been designed, the board contract had been designed for men. Because it had he's all the way through it. Now, part of me was thinking it's a charity, they don't want the legal expenses, but I was being asked to sign a contract as a he, you know, and not as a she. So that there's kind of little things like that that you need to kind of put. But my biggest thing is help other women. You know, if you help other women, I think it'll come back tenfold. and watch the media. Like if you're, because it is so easy to get into that mindset of how women are slated, and following, like I think Meghan Markle's probably one of your biggest examples of it. I mean, whether or not you're in the political or the royal side of it, if you look at what's actually put out in America and some of the articles about what she's doing as a female leader and how the media in the UK misrepresents her is just worlds apart. There's also a more, like serious aspect to it as well. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at so there's David Attenborough had a witness statement. So when I joined the board of SCARF, I was trying to educate myself on, energy poverty, how to make the planet safer. And I'd gone down the route of reading the audiobook from David Attenborough. And one of the really, really major things that he'd said in his witness statement was, in order to save the planet, now listen to this is game changing, but in order to save the planet, the one thing that needs to happen, which I don't think ever will, is that women need to be given choice. So, and he even goes on to give an example. And they did a test in India where women were being taken out of school at the age of 14 because they had to look after the home. So they did a test where they give women bicycles at the age of 14 so that they could continue with their schooling and get home in time to keep the house. And with the test that they did there, they found that where women had access to education and access to choice, they chose to have less children. So the biggest challenge that we have as a planet is population. And then I just found it mind-blowing that we'll spend millions on innovation, to save the planet, to do all this carbon things, but we won't give women a choice. And if you think it has to be global, it's not, so looking at the UK, perhaps we do have a choice, but in other countries we don't. So I find that quite standout, that we actually choose to invent something rather than just give women a choice. We think that we have choice, but sometimes we don't. There's also the learning that we've all got unconscious bias. And that's a real barrier for women. One of the examples that I'll give you is when you go for an interview and you're going for a technical post and they decide not to ask you technical questions. I've had that because they've assumed that I didn't have, and then come back and said, no, you didn't have the technical expertise. And I was like, which technical question did you ask? To find that, that organization and that wasn't a small organization, but chose in that moment not to ask the technical questions to the woman. So, and then tell you that you don't have the technical expertise. So, you do find things like that. In terms of CVs, I think women need to almost pass your CV to your biggest cheerleader. So who's your best friend will actually champion you and get them to do your CV. Don't do your own CV. Have a conversation with somebody who knows what you're capable of and let them do your CV for you, or put the highlights in your CV for you. Because traditionally we don't like to boast about ourselves. And I think if we can, I've done for many women, I've actually done their CVs for them. I've had a 30-minute conversation with them, and then I've gone off, asked them to tell me about their life, and then gone back and done their CV, and they were like, oh, I would have never had any of this. And because they'll always sort of like diminish themselves. So having your biggest cheerleader do your CV, I think is kind of game changing, and not just trying to do it yourself and make it look efficient and all the rest of it. But I would also say as well, if you're looking to go onto a board, a CV I feel is very different on a board. And I changed my CV for joining a board. So rather than having the whole of what all your responsibilities were, all the things that you had to do in your day job, I instead just did what we achieved. Whether it was me individually or as a team, looked at what the achievements were. And I think that was quite big for, especially if you're going on a board, and that's what they want to understand is what have you been able to change, what have you been able to achieve in your time in that role. And I think it is kind of really, really important to look at those things, the kind of your standard CV, and get your cheerleader to do it, and also the look at your achievements. Even if you look back at your CVs now and say, like, what are my achievements in there? Is it in there? Is it easy to read? So yeah, so I'll take us back a little bit to when I joined the board of Scarf. I was very green around the gills. I'd spoken to one of the existing board members and had told him about my WES training and said, gone through this was game changing. I really I had no idea how much I needed to be educated on how a board could run effectively. And at that point, he said, I think Scarf might be interested in somebody like you helping support us. Would you be interested? It was only because I had that conversation. So if you have somebody that sits in a board that you would like to go into a board, go and have that conversation to say, I'm really interested in how this could pan out for me. And when I joined the board, I think I would echo what Starkeeper says. It takes a year. I sat there petrified for the first year, trying to understand the finances, the profit and loss, understanding what's the risk for the business. If I make a decision, how's it going to impact? And it can be quite scary. But within 2 years of being on that board, I then became vice chair and was opted in as vice chair. And it didn't come down to all the decisions and things that I made. I asked a lot of questions, and I showed within the time that I was on that board that if push comes to shove, I would do the right thing. So it was about them understand and have the confidence in my integrity to do the right thing. And that's, for most boards, that is what they're looking for. Are you going to be the person that does the right thing when things are difficult? Are you going to be the person that kind of steps up when they have to make redundancies, when they, are you going to do right by the organization and by its employees as well? So I think that's really one of my standout, that's what people look for, on boards. And that genuinely doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man, that integrity needs to be there. So I think somebody's having to pop off. So I think the only my part in parts is choosing the right board. Consider the value that you can add and how you can help. And you've got to be passionate. It's got to be a board that you feel that you can make a difference on. And, just be clear about the time commitment that you have and what you can do about it, and understand what are the rest of the board members like, what kind of area are you going into. But don't be afraid to step out and tell somebody that you're interested in being a board, even if it's to me. Come and speak to me if you're interested in being on a board. I might be able to signpost you to an organization that are looking for board members. But yeah, so hopefully that was useful. And I'll hand back over to you, Janice.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was, again, really, really interesting. So thank you for sharing your, I'm going to say unique, journey, shall we say, your perspective. So yeah, really interesting how our three speakers have given a different sort of take on their personal journeys, and the importance of that journey to becoming a board member, becoming a leader, actually. So the board member, that's a role, as we know. I think what's come through for myself is sort of key things, obviously, is values, commitment, confidence, being empowered, and making that decision, and how our life's experience can actually influence our decisions as well. So I think, Susan, one thing I picked up as well is it's not necessarily like men versus women. It's about that confidence. How do we, create opportunities as well? And key thing as well is women not being competitive. between each other. I think we all recognise that. Anyhow, I'm mindful of the time. Katrina, Adrian, thank you for joining us. Do you have any questions to put to our speakers today, or any comments even if you don't have a question?
Probably more a comment than a question. It's really great to hear everybody's stories. I come from a third sector interface, and we are consistently up against trying to encourage more women actually to take on roles and take on trustee roles. And I'm a little bit of an ambassador myself for it, and I've sat on a couple of boards on my own, but like that, we do still face those sort of issues of that pale, male and stale that we've all kind of talked about. And it's really good because I think you're right. I think it's about keeping it diversified, and yes, women's part of that, but also, as we know, that we also face other barriers with people who have disabilities or who come from different ethnicities. So it's really, really interesting to hear people's different journeys. I've taken a couple of wee notes because I thought some of the stuff you shared with us was really, really interesting. So I really like the WES stuff as well. Getting that support through would be really empowering. So no, thank you very much. I'm so glad to hear all your stories. So as and hopefully help us moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
And if I can just say thanks very much for hosting me on this. I found some of the stories really interesting. I've seen some of the evidence myself in other places and other lines of work, and absolutely firmly believe that organizations are more productive if they have women in senior leadership or on the board. And I think that some of the messages that came across today, spreading those messages. And I think one of you, and I can't remember which one it was, mentioned the Women's Enterprise Scotland training that helped you to remove some of the barriers that perhaps you had held in place. It would be great to understand more fully what that was, that particular training or development work, and see if I could spread it around some of my colleagues. Thanks. Thank you very much.
No,
Yeah,
thank you.
It was board governance that was. We were part of a test, so I think the government gave them funding, to pull 20 women together. And as I say, I was number 21. They went and got extra money for me because I didn't meet the criteria. So I was sat with the people from like one of the technology leaders from like Clydesdale Bank, and so they picked women who were at the top of their game and kind of broke down, and we all had such gender bias. We were kind of like, yeah, we've had to fight to get where we're at, we've not put up, but actually learning to understand that it actually was our responsibility to help other women was kind of, it was almost gave us that gender lens to look through, where we could understand, accept our own bias. I've got huge bias because I don't understand a lot of cultures, and it makes me check myself very regularly to say, have I got a bias here? Am I making this decision because of a bias? And that training was game changing. But it really, really did make a difference. But Caroline, and I think it's Lynn Cadenhead that ran that training, it was so empowering for me. It made such a difference. I'd have never have gone on a board without their training. Really wouldn't have.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan. I think, yeah, we're running a bit late, actually. We were a bit late starting. But thank you, everyone, for your contribution today. I know it's a small group, but I think the conversation's been really valuable. And really like to follow this up and, look to see where maybe we prioritise or focus on for maybe a next session, because that's part of it as well, having this conversation and learning about each other's experience and what we need to support, taking in the bias into consideration as well, Susan. I think we're all guilty of that. Yeah, thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you for being here today. Thanks. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Janice.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.